conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. Thank you all so much for joining me. And if you could do me a favor, if you're listening to this in the podcast format, if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify or Amazon or Podbean or Pod Place to listen to podcasts or whatever podcasting platform you're listening on, if you could do me a favor and leave me a 5-star review right there on the platform, I sure would appreciate it. It helps the podcast grow, reach more people, and at the same time, it makes me feel better about myself, which is, of course, always very important. But today we'll be digging into, let's see here, the Fayette County Public School budget director placed on leave. And oh boy, she's pretty upset. And she and her lawyer have gotten together. They sent a letter that's really spelling out how much Fayette County Public Schools knew exactly about their financial woes and just how early they knew it. So we'll be digging into that. Also, let's see here. The federal government has come down saying Kentucky is one of 46 states that has been ordered to remove all references to gender ideology. But, you know, I could have swore we had a Republican legislature since 2016. So why is there gender ideology stuff in our teaching in the first place? Also on that same subject, as many of you may have heard by now, but Bob Hellringer, former Republican state House rep, was the uncle of the transgender shooter in Minneapolis. That is only important and noteworthy because of how outspoken Bob has been over transgender issues here in Kentucky. And it's not that he's against them. He's been fighting for more children to fall victim to untreated mental health issues leading to violent acts. We'll talk about that. Also, if we have time, we might dig into a few different stories on, like, for an example, why does the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet have a civil rights department in the first place? That'll be worth kind of discussing as well, because I noticed that. I was just clicking through. I was looking at, I think I was looking at some contracts or something, and I noticed the civil rights department of the Transportation Cabinet being involved in a highway situation, a highway contract. And I'm like, why do they have a civil rights department? Why does the highway department need its own specific civil rights department? It's not as much of, some may wonder, why does government have a civil rights group at all? And especially as debates over the Civil Rights Act have come more to the forefront recently. But some people have wondered, especially after I brought it up, why does the highway department need its own specific civil rights department? You know, that's just, and it's not as much about, it's not as much about an ideological disagreement or anything like that. You could agree with the government really, really caring about the race and ethnicity of individuals. You could really agree that the government needs to be involved in making sure that racial minority businesses get more contracts than white businesses from the state. You would think it would probably be the constitutional role of the state to just go ahead and make sure they issue contracts to people with no care for their skin color. Just basically everybody's graded on the same scale of the expense and ability to do quality work, and we just award contracts to the best possible person we can get for the cheapest price we can get it. You would think that would be their only parameters, but no, apparently our government's highly involved in making sure they're picking and choosing winners and losers of contracts based upon their skin color. This is not uncommon. This isn't new. And so even if though you're somebody who agrees with all of that, you should still be asking yourself the question of why does the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet need its own dedicated civil rights department? I mean, the theme of this show, the theme of pretty much my entire social media for quite some time, for years and years and years, has been, if you draw away one thing, the government can spend less money. This has been incredibly important to me that we, one day, if I would consider my entire political advocacy in my entire life to be a success, if just 1 year, one of our budget years, we pass a budget year every 2 years here in Kentucky. If just one of those budget years, the overall budget we pass went down just even 1% from 2 year period to 2 year period. If we could just for once spend less money as a government here within the state, I would consider all this work, all this effort, everything I've put into putting together a show that not only keeps you informed on policy and everything else, but also keeps you informed on exactly what our government is doing. All of that, if we could just get that going. Now, you may say, look, that's simple. There's a lot of issues going on. I hear you. But it's quickly become, and you see this nationally too as well, a colossal task to be able to get government to spend less money one time. And you see these kinds of things. You don't need a civil rights department for the Kentucky Department of Transportation. They worry about highways and issue driver's licenses. And, well, we all see what's going on with the driver's license issue. They've got, workers allegedly taking bribes to give illegal immigrants driver's licenses. And then on the paving side of thing, most of the time they're single bid, no bid contracts anyways. Something we've talked about on the show. But yet, despite all that, when you are at the pump, and this is why this is important too, because the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet is almost solely funded by your fuel tax, your gas tax. When you're at the pump, that money that you're getting, that you when you're pumping your car, can only go to a few sources. Legally, it has to go towards the roads, upkeep of infrastructure. And so the Kentucky Department of Transportation gets the bulk of it. KSP gets some of it. Obviously, they do highway patrol, so that's part of how they're funded. And I believe the airports will get some of the rural airports around there will get some of that. And a chunk of that money, when you're literally, this is the price is this charge you get at the gas station. You would literally pay less on gas if the Kentucky Department of Transportation figured out ways to be more efficient. You could get the same highway and road quality, which let's call spade a spade, ain't that great, if the Department of Highways and Transportation just figured out a way to be a little more efficient with the money they have. And a good start of that might be, you don't need your own civil rights department. That's why people are upset about it. Of course, that's something the leftists, of course, attack me for bringing up on social media. I post about this. They're like, oh, you're just a bigot. You hate minorities. Oh, you racist Republicans. No, it's a waste of money. That is the point. And speaking of waste of money, speaking about tire fires and financial issues, we have, of course, stopping into education. We're talking a lot about it because it's that time of year where schools all around and entities all around the state are raising their taxes. This is when they make the decision to raise their taxes or not. And so we've got a school district in central Kentucky raising taxes. Of course, Fayette County Public Schools having a lot of financial issues there. They put their budget director on leave. She's suing. We'll go into what she has to say. That's quite an interesting conversation as well. And of course, the federal government coming down hard on the gender ideology within K-12 education here in Kentucky. We'll be discussing all that and more when we come back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Once again, please leave a review if you're listening to this on radio, TV. Make sure you head over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. See all the places where you can catch up on old shows or if you missed part of this one. Otherwise, we'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. So Fayette County Public Schools has been just a roller coaster. But they're not the only school district in central Kentucky that's apparently having some financial issues, as Jessamine County Schools just took a vote to go ahead and raise the taxes, the property taxes in that district by more than that 4%. Those of you who didn't hear my show from Monday last week, or Tuesday last week, one of those 2 days. I think Tuesday last week I put out that show. And if you didn't hear it, I think Monday last week I put out that show. So if you didn't hear it, go back and listen to it. You can head over to theandrewshow.com, and it would be the episode before the one I did with Lee Watts. It'd be before the episode called $52,000 Windows. That's right. For those of you who missed that, I had Lee Watts on, and we discussed how the state legislature is spending $52,000 a window to refurbish just run-of-the-mill windows from the 1910s. No, like, stainless glass or mosaics or anything like that, just normal windows. But from 1910, they're spending $52,000 a window on average to go ahead and refurbish those and get those set back into the building. So you can go back and listen to that. But I discussed about how this works, and the legislature has passed a law allowing taxing districts, so that's your city, your county, your school boards, to raise their ad valorem, their property taxes 4% year over year with just a vote amongst the board, them deciding they want to go ahead and raise those taxes. Now, some people say, well, they shouldn't have the right to raise taxes at all. Now, if you're just against property tax as a whole, and there's a lot of good reasons to be against it, and I have some agreement with you on that for sure. You can count me as an ally and those who want to get rid of property tax. But if outside of that, you can take an issue with the property tax, but people will claim, well, they shouldn't have the right to tax at all. Well, what do you mean? They're elected. The school board's elected. Now, who shouldn't have the right to raise taxes at all is the library board. They're able to tax you on a property tax, and that board isn't elected at all. They're appointed now by the judge executive. Before, they weren't even appointed by the judge executive. They were self-electing. Those people should have never had a right to raise taxes. But your school boards, your county fiscal courts, your city councils, those are elected positions. So what the legislature has done is say, okay, you can raise taxes 4% year over year if you want to. For those of you who think that's too low, they would double your taxes in 18 years, far surpassing what inflation has been historically by raising it 4% every year. They could double your taxes. So they're doing okay. But if they raise it past that, what ends up happening is that it can now be put up for a referendum. And the way it's wrote in Kentucky, and you should look into this if you decide you want to get involved in a referendum situation within your area. And as I went over a few days ago in the show, remember too, keeping your rate the same most likely is still a tax increase of more than 4%, because the way the law is wrote, it's about that check you write. So if property values go up and they keep the rate the same, your taxes can still go up more than 4%. That is recallable. That is available for referendum. So what happens is they raise it past that. You then can go out, and a group can go out and collect signatures and get at least either 5,000 signatures or 10% of the amount of people who voted in the last presidential election. So however many people voted in 2024, 10% of that, whichever one's lower. And you get those signatures, and then you can go ahead and get a referendum vote put on the ballot. Therefore, now the school district's tax increase goes to a ballot, and the people get to vote whether or not they want that increase of taxes or not directly, not just by electing people who vote for it, but by actually voting on it directly. And Jessamine County Public Schools has went ahead and done that. I've already been reached out to by some activists in that area. They're getting together their processes for how they're going to collect these signatures and the information of voters in the area that want to challenge this. Once they have that out there, if you live in Jessamine County, follow my socials at KY Cooperrider on X. On Facebook, just search for Andrew Cooperrider. And I will go ahead and make sure that information gets out there. But Jessamine County Schools, Fayette County Schools having issues. Fayette County Public Schools apparently has known about their issues for a long time because the budget director has been, and this is a Miss Grimes, was placed on leave, and she filed a lawsuit. And in a letter to the school board and the superintendent, a public letter, her lawyer had went through everything that has occurred. And the reasons why she believes she's being let go is because she knew and warned them about what was going on with the budget, how there were issues with the budget, and they told her to keep it quiet from the public. They told her to stay quiet about it and to stop raising up those concerns, and she continued to do so. Therefore, and this is what she alleges in her complaint, in her lawsuits, therefore she was placed on administrative leave to get rid of her, to silence her from ringing that alarm bell about their financial behaviors. And it's now, for the record, it's August, right, of 2025 or close to it. And in August of 2025, the school board is now suddenly becoming aware of this issue over the last several months. The school leadership is suddenly having an issue over these last several months. And apparently these issues regarding the budget was first recognized by Budget Director Grimes on February 13th, 2024. That's over a year ago. And this is what is detailed in that letter that was made public that the budget director's lawyer had sent to the board, sent to the superintendent. It says, on February 13, 2024, Dr. Barber advised Ms. Grimes that the budget needed to be reduced by 5%, and Ms. Grimes advised that more than 5% was required. Dr. Barber did not accept Ms. Grimes' recommendation, nor did he adhere to his 5% direction. Dr. Barber refused to allow required reductions to the tentative budget, even though Dr. Barber had acknowledged the need for at least 5%. Then in the fall, Dr. Barber advised that the working budget would not set forth required cuts because Dr. Liggins needed to get a new contract and board elections were looming. So already off the bat, what they're saying is that back in February of last year, Fayette County Public Schools, the leadership there, was aware of a budget problem, even acknowledging they needed to cut at least 5%. Now, Grimes says, look, you need to cut more than that. There's more fat on this here bird that needed to be chopped off before we could get to the meat of the thing. But despite that, apparently Dr. Barber said, no, I think 5% would be enough. But then didn't even put in his own 5% reduction. Why? Because according to what Grimes is saying in this letter, according to her attorney, it was election season and Liggins needed a new contract. He needed a new contract full of those nice perks, like, getting his car paid for and a life coach and a super intensive medical examination that for some reason can't just be covered by his normal insurance. It has to be its own thing. That's not where she starts. She also says, continuing on now in her timeline from that letter, she says on July 1st, 2024, so first instance was February 13th, this is now July 1st, Ms. Grimes again informed Dr. Barber that reductions for the fiscal year 2025 school year needed to be made. During the July 2024 CASA conference, Ms. Grimes advised Rodney Jackson and Dr. Barber that the fund balance was going to be much lower and the need to take action to reduce and there is need to take action to reduce spending. Dr. Barber instructed Ms. Grimes that she was not to say that cash flow was going to be an issue and was directed not to speak of the issues. Ms. Grimes also advised that if spending was not reduced, the district would fall below the board policy 6% contingency fund, as well as the state required 2% and eventually be under state management. Now, this is important to recognize because in this most recent board meeting, Dr. Liggins from Fayette County Public Schools superintendent stated that investigation is underway to figure out where all the tentative budget money went. You see, when they put together the working group to solve, like, how do we not raise taxes but still make our schoolwork problem? And they're trying to solve that issue right there. Well, in that process of doing that, they apparently discovered that they thought there was 6% of money in this contingency fund. They thought this fund had like $15-20 million more than what they ended up coming back later and saying it had in it. And what's weird is the board never approved any spending out of that contingency fund. And so Liggins was asked, well, where'd the money go? And he said, well, we're investigating it. Well, apparently, Ms. Grimes back on July 1st, 2024, was telling them, you are spending that money. You're dipping into those reserves. And not only are you going below the board's required 6%, but there's a 2% requirement that comes from the state. Essentially, the state says, look, you have to keep 2% of your budget in reserves as backup money, and if you fail to do that, we're going to come in and take over. Now, the reason why they do that is so that way if a school is failing to manage their money, there's still hopefully enough, a couple percentage points of dollars in there that the state's able to come in and go ahead and work with in order to fix the financial issues they may have. So it's kind of like, look, you need to save this amount, and if you're falling below that savings amount, you're having financial issues. So clearly, we need to come in here and fix that, but we need some money to work with. So that's kind of why that requirement's in place. But this isn't the end of the timeline. No, this continues on for another year of issues being brought up about this budget, about cuts needing to be made, and her being told, Ms. Grimes being told to shut her trap about it by a school leadership group that is clearly trying to hide just how bad the financial situation was. So we'll be digging into that continued in this next segment. We'll be back in a few short minutes. And you're back here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For the break, we're digging into Fayette County Public Schools. One of their budget directors, Ms. Grimes, was placed on administrative leave. She's filed or contacted an attorney. They've filed a letter to the board, to the superintendent, detailing exactly what's going on. In the last segment, we learned that on July 1st, she was like, look, we got to make cuts. We're going to fall below. We're having cash flow issues. We're going to fall below. The board required 6%. We're going to fall below. The state required 2% in reserves that were required to hold. And she was, and according to her, she was allegedly told to shut up about it. Don't take any action and do not speak of the issues. We continue. Then she says on July 31st, 2024. So remember, this saga started in February of last year, over a year ago. We're still over a year ago. And she's talking about these issues. On July 31st, 2024, Dr. Barber's instructed Ms. Grimes not to tell the public that cash flow was an issue for the district. Remember how the board member, or is there Christine Penny or Penny Christian or whatever her name was, that I covered? I should know. It was Penny Christian. That was conducting herself horribly in the budget about transparency being weaponized. Transparency, they're not transparent. They are hiding things from you clearly. They knew, and it's not a surprise. We shouldn't be shocked. An $800 million organization doesn't suddenly learn about their financial issues and their inability to make a budget and make payroll and do these things suddenly. The problems are looming and coming, and yet they decide to keep spending and spending. On August 13th, Dr. Barber took Ms. Grimes' subordinate, gave him the same decision-making authority as Ms. Grimes. So the other allegation here is that on top of her trying to call out the misspending and everything else, that they were actively in leadership now trying to get rid of her because she had a financial sense to say, look, this is a problem. We need to stop it. We continue. On August 26th, 2024, Ms. Grimes again informed Dr. Barber that budget cuts of at least 10% or more must be made for fiscal year 2025. So she's telling them, look, we got to cut our spending at least 10%. On April 23rd, 2025, Ms. Grimes informed both Dr. Barber and Rodney Jackson that expenditures were outperforming revenues and federal funds may be decreasing. On May 2nd, 2025, in a meeting between Dr. Barber, Rodney Jackson, and Ms. Grimes was effectively prevented from suggesting to the board that budget cuts may be a suitable method in order to effectuate the budget's desired 1% raise for teachers. Instead, Dr. Barber and Rodney Jackson reported the only way to achieve the 1% raise was through an occupational license tax. So that was through an increase of taxes. So this was on May 2nd, 2025. So remember they came forward, they said, look, we got this budget. Our only suggestion we have is to raise the occupational tax 50% in order to give a just simple 1% raise to the teachers. And Grimes was told, like, look, that's not the only suggestion. We can actually make some cuts. Like, no. We can't do that. Then also on May 2nd, 2025, Ms. Grimes reported to Dr. Barber and Mr. Jackson that the district could not afford a 1% raise for the teachers and needed to make an additional $3 million budget cut. Ms. Grimes attempted to bring these matters before the board, but was silenced by Dr. Barber and Superintendent Liggins, who changed key parts of Ms. Grimes' dialogue and presentation to omit any need of budget cuts. So now we have a conspiracy of sorts going on amongst top administrators to hide from the board and the public. I think the board probably knew. I think certain members of the board certainly kind of knew what was going on. But to hide from the public and probably members of the board about what was the exact financial position and solutions that were available to them. And this, of course, is all alleged in this letter here. Then on May 5th, 2025, Ms. Grimes advised Superintendent Liggins that adding an additional $200,000 in Medicaid could not be re-included into the budget, but Superintendent Liggins made Jessica Williams reinstate the item, effectively subverting Ms. Grimes' recommendation. Then on May 19th, Ms. Grimes informed Dr. Barber that she did not have the authority to add the occupational license tax because it was not an improved revenue source, and in turn, Dr. Barber asked to keep that information confidential. On May 27th, Dr. Barber amended the 26 salary schedule to include the 1% pay increase, which Grimes repeatedly advised could not be afforded. On June 6, 2025, Rodney Jackson received a new title of Senior Executive Director without an interview as a part of a reorganization. Neither Ms. Grimes nor any other female was informed about the creation of this role, nor provided an opportunity to interview despite being well qualified. On August 6, 2025, Ms. Grimes advised the board would need to consider changing its 6% contingency to 2%. Ms. Grimes and her team were supposed to meet on August 7th with Superintendent Liggins to discuss that 26 working budget, but Superintendent Liggins refused to meet with them. This is incredibly important because this new balanced budget that they're putting forward is built on an assumption, and this was in their emergency meeting, that that a contingency fund has been reduced below levels. But the problem here is that Liggins hasn't formally asked. Ms. Grimes was letting them know, you're spending money you haven't had approved. You're spending money out of this contingency fund. And he never formally asked. And yet, the board members are not trying to hold him accountable for doing it. And when asked where the money went, all he's saying is, oh, look, we're investigating this. Well, apparently, if somebody speaks up and tries to tell you where the money went, you fire them. So what are they doing about their budget now? I mean, outside the fact they're now facing a lawsuit from apparently the one person trying to tell them all, you guys were driving off a cliff here. Well, in the most recent board meeting, Liggins identified a $6.2 million in additional cuts that he said didn't require board approval, another $8.9 million, and cuts at revenue sources that require board approval. However, some of the cuts that required board approval were things about selling real estate and raising the price of school lunches. So, doesn't seem like the board's too on board with some of those, but they probably should be, especially when it comes to real estate. Since 2017, and this is where a lot of the Fayette County Public Schools woes come from. Since 2017, and why they're spending like crazy, outside the travel's out of control as well. The administrative central office has a lot of people, but when we talk about property, so since 2017, they've opened up 5 schools. They opened up Mary Brighton Middle School. They opened up Frederick Douglass High School. They opened up The Hill, which is a trade and technical school that also pulls from high schools. They opened up or are opening up building the Rise STEM Girls School. Well, they kind of opened it up, and this is like a new building for it. And then they also have the STEAM Academy, which is another STEM school. Here's what's weird, though. When we look at 2017, when these schools first started opening up, the number of students we had at that time was 41,649. How many students do they have now? 41,697, according to Nish. According to Civic Lex, it's 41,676. Regardless which total you pick, that is a student body size that has not increased, that has increased less than 50 students since 2017, yet they've built 2 middle schools, a high school, a technical school, or I'm sorry, they built a middle school, a high school, a technical school, and 2 STEM schools. Less than 50 more students. Of course they don't have the money. They want something fancy that they can be proud of because they can't be proud of the results they're getting for the kids, so instead they just want fancy buildings. That's not the only way we're failing children. Of course, we're failing the mental health side of things. That shooting out in Minneapolis shows us a lot. We'll be digging into that, its connection to Kentucky after this short break. You're listening to The Andrew Cooperrider Show. And you're back here on this final segment of The Andrew Cooperrider Show. So, unfortunately, as many of you are aware, there was a Catholic school shooting out in Minnesota. Transgender individual, identifying individual, and normally, of course, this show focuses on Kentucky politics. Well, as it turns out, a former Republican state house rep out of the Louisville area named Bob Hellringer is this shooter's uncle. Now, you may say, well, that's unfortunate. What does that have to do with the politics? Or that doesn't mean necessarily anything. But in this case, it actually means a lot. For you see, Hellringer, while a quote-unquote Republican, has been a very active advocate for LGBTQ individuals, specifically LGBTQ, specifically T, transgender kids. Not an advocate for them in the way you or I might be an advocate of saying, look, and if you don't recognize this, you're not going to understand or agree with anything in this segment because you have to recognize this. And you don't need a medical degree to recognize this. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to be a psychologist to recognize this. But simply put, cutting off body parts and pumping a kid full of hormones and other drugs like that change their gender is not how you treat an individual with an extreme mental health condition. And if you think you were born into the wrong gender, you have a mental health problem that needs to be treated. And when we sit here and do these things, like chop off your body parts and pump you full of hormones, it's not fixing that problem. It's not addressing that issue. In fact, it's making it worse. And that leads to these issues. When you look at these school shootings or you look at mass shootings like these, not gang mass shootings, which is the majority of mass shootings, but these kinds of shootings, such as at these schools and everything else, you start to realize that, of course, mental health plays a gigantic role. A normal, healthy, well-adjusted child is not a risk of going down to the school and shooting it up, no matter how many guns the parents own. So clearly we look at that mental health, and when we have these mental health issues in children and we treat them by not treating them, by indulging them, by telling them you're crazy and that's okay and we don't need to fix you. In fact, let's help you go crazy. Let's help you chop off things. Let's help you fall into deeper confusion. These are the problems you're going to have. And if you agree with everything I just said, you might then recognize why we're talking about Bob Hellringer. Because his nephew just shot up a Catholic school because instead of treating the mental illness, instead, adults in his life bought into some crazed belief he was a girl and pumped him full of hormones, pumped him full of drugs, and warped his mind instead of treating his mental health issue. And Bob Hellringer stood in the way when Kentucky Republicans did end up passing, but he tried to stop them from passing bills to treat these kids how they need to be treated, to treat their mental health issues as mental health issues, not to do these other things. Bob stood in the way. That's the problem. When you sit there and say, well, he can't be blamed for what his nephew does, Bob can be blamed. When you have somebody trying to sit there and say, no, I want to fight for the right for these things to happen to the children, for children to continue to be treated this way, that when they say they're gender confused or it's foisted upon them by their parents, that I want to fight for their right to chop off body parts and to pump them full of drugs. And those decisions to do that leads to now people being shot up in Catholic schools because we're not treating the mental illness. I don't care how you cut it up. I don't want you to point there and say, oh, Andrew, you're being mean to him. I'm not being mean to him. If he was just his uncle, wouldn't be a part of the conversation. But he's not just his uncle. He's an advocate for those kinds of treatments, and that's what leads to these problems. Bob is an advocate for these types of incidences to occur because he refuses to realize that you don't treat a kid with a mental illness by telling them they were born into the wrong body to hate themselves, and you need to take these drugs so you can feel better about your body. And it's not a mental health medicine. It's a we're going to pump a boy full of girls' hormones to fix a mental issue. And if you don't believe me, here's Bob Hellringer testifying in front of the Kentucky legislature on a bill.
I know that because I served with him. It's just distressing to me to see the amount of legislation, not just this bill, this pronoun bill, but bills in the House, House Bill 30, 58, 120, bathroom bills, conscience clause, so people don't have to treat transgender kids if they don't want to, can discriminate against them, what kind of treatment they can have or can't have. Why are we singling these people out? How many people are we talking about? How many transgender kids are there in the state that is so deserving of this kind of attention, okay? That's pure discrimination. That's all this is. I would think the legislature has so much more to do in education than to have a pronoun law. I mean, I'm just reading this. Pronouns that do not conform to a student's biological sex as indicated on the student's original unedited birth certificate. Why is that any business of the General Assembly? Why don't let the schools handle this? Why not let the families handle this? But the General Assembly has to handle it. Haven't these kids had enough challenges? Then have the school have to say, I can't call you he or him. You're going to have to be her or she, because the state government said so. I think it's wrong. There's either right or wrong, and this is wrong. And you know what? It's not just discrimination. It's not just immoral, in my opinion, but it's not going to work, okay? You're not going to take people who, for some reason, you don't approve of what's happened to them as if they had any choice over that. You don't approve of them or some of their lifestyle. What's next? You're going to tell them how they can dress when they come to school, what subjects they can take. What's next?
So not only is Bob a demon, not only has his mind been corrupted, but also he's stupid. It's an unfortunate thing to be both corrupted and stupid. Because Bob, his last argument there, we don't tell them what subjects to take. Yeah, we literally do, Bob. Bob, you voted for laws that do tell students what subjects they have to take, what their graduation requirements are. Bob, you yourself have done it. Shut up, Bob. Also, Bob, you said in there, and this is something I actually agree with you on. You said these kids have no choice. And they don't have a choice. But I don't think we agree on what that means. You think they don't have a choice because, well, these kids, they're just born transgender. They're not. It's piece of crud adults like you, Bob, who push these ideologies on them, tell them to hate themselves, tell them to hate their bodies, tell them it's okay, let's just chop off a couple body parts. Let's just give you some drugs. You'll feel all better. We'll just give you some hormones. You'll be fine. It's people like that don't give them a choice. They're a child. They have no choices to make. They can't make these decisions about their body. It's the adults in their lives that are supposed to step in, and you're a failure, Bob, for doing that, for failing to do that. I'm sure the Fairness Campaign, all these other LGBTQ groups are like, darn, how does this happen that like one of our biggest advocates that we can say, oh, this is bipartisan Republican support, just so happens to be the uncle of a transgender shooter? Of course it was going to happen. Why do you think this Republican felt so strongly about it? Because somebody in his family was transgender. And if you pay any attention to what's going on here, it's natural that somebody with mental health issues that go untreated, it's not natural, sorry, it's a foregone conclusion that people with mental health issues that go untreated are going to harm themselves or others. That will be the outcome. That's why transgender kids have such high suicide rates, because nobody intercedes to actually treat their mental health illnesses. And I'm tired of it. And you can say, look, oh, you're using a tragedy for... No, I'm not. I'm tired of seeing kids kill themselves and kill others. Because this society has turned their mental illness into some sort of thing that they'll indulge instead of treating it. And it's time it stops before more kids die. It's time people like Bob change their mind. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank you all so much for joining me. Back here next week. I hope you have a great rest of your day.